Chapter 25 of Legacy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Peak. Legacy by James Smits. Chapter 25. Trigger gasped. Her eyes flew open. She made a convulsive effort to vanish beneath the surface of the creek. Being flat on the sand as it was, that didn't work. So she stopped splashing about and made rapid covering up motions here and there instead. "You've got a nerve!" she snapped as her breath came back. "Beat it! Fast!" Old bashful Quillan, standing on the bank 15 feet above her, looked hurt. He also looked. "Look," he said plaintively. "I just came over to make sure you were all right. Wild animals around. I wasn't studying the color scheme." "Beat it! At once!" Quillan inhaled with apparent difficulty. "Though, now it's been mentioned," he went on, speaking rapidly and unevenly, "there is all that brown and that sort of pink and that lovely white." He was getting more enthusiastic by the moment. Trigger became afraid he would fall off the bank and land in the creek beside her. "And the wet red hair and the freckles," he rattled along, his eyes starting out of his head. "And the lovely Quillan!" she yelled. "Please!" Quillan checked himself. He said. He drew a deep breath. The wild look faded. Sanity appeared to return. "Well, it's the truth about those wild animals. Some sort of large uncouth critter was observed just now, ducking into the forest at the upper end of the valley." Trigger darted a glance along the bank. Her clothes were 40 feet away, just beside the water. "I'm observing some sort of large uncouth critter right here," she said coldly. "What's worse, it's observing me. Turn around." Quillan sighed. "You're a hard woman, Argee," he said. But he turned. He was carrying a holstered gun, as a matter of fact, but he usually did that nowadays anyway. "This thing," he went on, "is supposed to have a head like a bat, 3 feet across. It flies." "Very interesting," Trigger told him. She decided he wasn't going to turn around again. "So now I'll just get into my clothes and then..." It came quietly out of the trees around the upper bend of the creek, 60 feet away. It had a head like a bat and was blue on top and yellow below. Its flopping wingtips barely cleared the bank on either side. The 3-foot mouth was wide open, showing very long, thin, white teeth. It came skimming swiftly over the surface of the water toward her. "Quillan!" They walked back along the trail to camp. Trigger walked a few steps ahead, her back very straight. The worst of it had been the smug look on his face. "Heel," she observed. "Heel, heel, heel." "Now, Trigger," Quillan said calmly behind her. "After all, it was you who came flying up the bank and wrapped yourself around my neck. All wet, too." "I was scared!" Trigger snarled. "Who wouldn't be? You certainly didn't hesitate an instant to take full advantage of the situation." "True," Quillan admitted. "I'd drop the bat. There you were. Who'd hesitate? I'm not out of my mind." She did 2 dance steps of pure rage and spun to face him. She put her hands on her hips. Quillan stopped warily. "Your mind," she said. "I'd hate to have one like it. What do you think I am? One of Belchik's houris?" For a man his size, he was really extremely quick. Before she could move, he was there, one big arm wrapped around her shoulders, pinning her arms to her sides. "Easy, Trigger," he said softly. Well, others had tried to hold her like that when she didn't want to be held. A twist, a jerk, a heave, and over and down they went. Trigger braced herself quietly. If she was quick enough now. She twisted, jerked, heaved. She stopped, discouraged. The situation hadn't altered appreciably. She had been afraid it wasn't going to work with Quillan. "Let go!" she said furiously, aiming a fast heel at his instep. But the instep flicked aside. Her shoe dug into the turf of the path. The ape might even have an extra pair of eyes on his feet. Then his free palm was cupped under her chin, tilting it carefully. His other eyes appeared above hers. Very close. Very dark. "I'll bite," Trigger whispered fiercely. "I'll bite. They walked along the trail, hand in hand. They came up over the last little rise. Trigger looked down at the camp. She frowned. pretty dull," she observed. "Eh?" Quillan asked, startled. "Not that, Ape," she said. She squeezed his hand. "Your morals aren't good, but dull it wasn't. I meant generally. We're just sitting here now waiting. Nothing seems to be happening." It was true, at least on the surface. There were a great number of ships and men around and near Luscious, but they weren't in view. They were ready to jump in any direction, at any moment, but they had nothing to jump at yet. The Commissioner's transmitters hadn't signaled more than 2 or 3 times in the last 2 days. Even the short communicators remained mostly silent. "Cheer up, doll," Quillan said. "Something's bound to break pretty soon." That evening, a Devagas ship came zooming in on Luscious. They were prepared for it, of course. That somebody came around from time to time to look over the local plasmoid crop was only to be expected. As the ship surfaced in atmosphere on the other side of the planet, 4 one-man scout fighters flashed in on it from 4 points of the horizon, radiation screens up. They tacked holding beams on it and braced themselves. A Federation destroyer appeared in the air above it. The Devagas ship couldn't escape, so it blew itself up. They were prepared for that, too. The Devagas pilot was being dead-brained 3 minutes later. He didn't know a significant thing except the exact coordinates of an armed subterranean Devagas dome 3 days' run away. The scout ships that had been hunting for the dome went howling in toward it from every direction. The more massive naval vessels of the Federation followed behind. There was no hurry for the heavies. The captured Devagas ship's attempt to beam a warning to its base had been smothered without effort. The scouts were getting in fast enough to block escape attempts. "And now we split forces," the Commissioner said. He was the only one, Trigger thought, who didn't seem too enormously excited by it all. "Quillan, you and your group get going. They can use you there a whole lot better than we can here." For just a second, Quillan looked like a man being dragged violently in 2 directions. He didn't look at Trigger. He asked, "Think it's wise to leave you people unguarded?" "Quillan," said Commissioner Tate, "that's the first time in my life anybody has suggested I needed guarding." "Sorry, sir," said Quillan. "You mean," Trigger said, "we're not going? We're just staying here?" "You've got an appointment, remember?" the Commissioner said. Quillan and company were gone within the hour. Mantelish, Holati Tate, Lyad and Trigger stayed at camp. Luscious looked very lonely. "It isn't just the king plasmoid they're hoping to catch there," the Commissioner told Trigger. "And I wouldn't care, frankly, if the thing stayed lost the next few thousand years. But we had a very odd report last week. The Federation's undercover boys have been scanning the Devagas worlds in Tranest very closely of late, naturally. The report is that there isn't the slightest evidence that a single one of the top members of the Devagas hierarchy has been on any of their worlds in the past 2 months." "Oh," she said. "They think they're out here? In that dome?" "That's what's suspected. But why?" He scratched his chin. "If anyone knows, they haven't told me. It's probably nothing nice." Trigger pondered. "You'd think they'd used facsimile," she said. "Like Lyad." "Oh, they did," he said. "They did. That's one of the reasons for being pretty sure they're gone. They're nowhere near as expert at that facsimile business as the Tranest characters. A little studying of the recordings showed the facts were just that." Trigger pondered again. "Did they find anything on Tranest?" "Yes. One combat strength squadron of those souped up frigates of the Aurora class they're allowed by treaty can't be accounted for." Trigger cupped her chin in her hands and looked at him. "Is that why we've stayed on Luscious, Holati? The 4 of us?" "It's one reason. That repulsive thing of yours is another." "What about him?" "I have a pretty strong feeling," he said, "that while they'll probably find the hierarchy in that Devagas dome, they won't find the 112-113 item there." "So Lyad still is gambling," Trigger said. "And we're gambling we'll get more out of her next play than she does." She hesitated. "Holati." "Yes?" "When did you decide it would be better if nobody ever got to see that king plasmoid again?" Holati Tate said, "About the time I saw the reconstruction of that yellow monster of Balmordan's. Frankly, Trigger, there was a good deal of discussion of possibilities along that line.